Let me get into today's session. Professor Rohan Samarajiva, we don't need any detail about him, any comprehensive introduction. He's a kind of a household name during our time. When we were student, few years ago, decades ago rather, he was the one of the leading personality who introduced ICT industry in Sinhala Antarjala Gedarata, if I'm not mistaken. Antarjala Obey, that was the caption, the program name, and he was celebrated individual during our time. Of course, even today, industry as well as academia, highly respected professor. Therefore, I don't want to take much of his time. Over to you, sir. We can start our webinar now. Thank you very much.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to have this opportunity. I think for people who talk about new technology, it's always sometimes a mixed blessing to use the new technology to talk about their subject. But let's see. What I'd like to start with is a little quiz, because one of the problems with this mode, the Zoom meetings, is that there is a certain distance that we have from each other. So may I ask the technical team to put up 2 questions so that everybody who's participating in this virtual meeting can get a sense of what everybody else is thinking. I'm talking about the first 2 questions. Can you see the questions?
Yeah.
And if you answer the questions, Zoom should be able to give us a running tally of how the numbers are. Now, I should see the tally. Does anybody see the tally running?
Yes.
No, I think everybody has got to answer, and then you have to say accept, and then you'll get the score. So the questions are basically, what were you thinking about your career prospects? And how did the COVID situation, the current difficulties regarding the epidemic or pandemic, how did that affect your thinking about your careers? Are we getting any responses?
Yes, sir, very much. We have 41 people already
answering, right?
Yes, submitted, and yes, it's increasing, almost 52%.
So now close it off. Yes. Then people should be able to see the score.
Okay.
Or you can announce the score, whatever. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah. Yeah, we can share the results, sir. Can we?
Sure, good. Excellent.
And for question 1, we have 78% optimistic, and pessimistic, of course, 22% for first.
Right.
Question. Second, we have 67% for better.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, okay. And for worse, we have a 33%.
Okay, so that actually reflects something that we say about COVID and the technological aspect, which is, as you may know, there are some companies, like, for example, Reliance Jio, which has attracted enormous investments, billions of US dollars in investments in the last month. And the thinking is that it is because there will be a greater reliance on this technology, on remote communication, that they are attracting these investments and resources in what is now being increasingly called the new normal. So what is the new normal? What we basically talk about is until we get a vaccine, until this runs its course, human beings will fear close contact with other human beings, which is sort of exemplified by the fact that we are having this meeting, this activity in a remote form. So for human beings who are essentially social animals, this is actually a bit of a problem. More than a bit of a problem. People get lonely, people get, and there are some things, some kinds of work that I will talk about that you can't do without being in the presence of others. We will also have things like social distancing for a period of time. So in Singapore, for example, they now have laws that allow the government to actually fine you if you get too close to other people in a public place. I was in Hong Kong after the Sars crisis. So SARS was still about 2003. And one day, very late at night, must have been about 11 p.m., I had been to dinner with some people and I was coming out by myself, walking to my hotel, and the roads were empty. There was nobody there. Pretty much nobody. Hong Kong, as you know, is a very densely populated place. And I have allergies. I have sinusitis, So I felt a sneeze coming, and unlike what I normally do, I just sort of let it go, a very explosive sneeze. And then suddenly I found that people who I thought weren't there were actually there in the shadows, and everybody was looking at me like I'm some kind of criminal. Because of that experience with SARS, nobody sneezes without covering their nose in Hong Kong. Nobody sneezes loudly. Everybody is very, very programmed to behave in a way respectful of other people's health. So we will have the government, but we will have each other enforcing these rules. And of course, for industry, for those entering the job market, the most important thing, of course, will be whether there will be jobs, right? Now, you are optimistic, and your optimism has increased, which I find impressive. But in actual fact, if you look at the numbers on this slide, you will find, if you look at that third column in red, so it's a slight shift, which is the first line is about apparel and textiles. That's Sri Lanka's largest export. So can you see the slide?
No, sir. If you can share the screen, please.
Oh, I'm not sharing the screen. Oh, sorry. Okay. Very good. I thought I was. Okay, just a minute.
Let me take this. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Share screen. Now do you see it?
Yes, of course. Very
okay,
clear.
Good.
And you had to adjust a little bit, sir.
Full screen.
Yep.
Are we good?
Good.
Okay. So here, sorry about that. So here you'll see the first line, apparel and textiles. That's Sri Lanka's largest export item. So January to March last year, it was 1,469, I suppose, million, right? There has been a 14.9 decrease. That is the third column that is in red. So if you look through that third column, you see tea exports have declined, rubber products have declined. You keep going, and there's only one, which is petroleum products, where it has increased. Now that is some accidental thing. You didn't know that we were exporting petroleum products, but that is when you do bunkering and things like that, right? So other than that, everything is negative. So that should give us some concern. That is giving concern to a lot of people who study the economy and those people in government, right? So what that means is that if you're in the garment industry or if you're in rubber products, you're somewhat worried. You're hoping that the market will come back, right? The issue is that, let's take rubber products, right? Sri Lanka exports 80% of its rubber in the form of gloves and tires and various things. Now, it's unlikely that the demand for gloves will go down. If anything, the demand for gloves will go up. So if you're in a glove factory, you're generally happy. You should be happy. But if you're in something like apparel, you should be a little worried, because when people are uncertain about their earning power, when people are uncertain about how much money they will be making, it's possible that they will cut down on certain discretionary expenses. That is, if you just look back at how you were spending your money in April and May, when the country was closed down, you weren't really spending it on luxury items. You were focusing on the essentials. So if anybody is in a business where the item is not considered an essential, they will have to be a little concerned, right? It'll take some time for the demand in those areas to come back. There is also this concern about supply chains, where people are saying, we were too reliant on one country, we were too reliant on China, we were too reliant on foreign sources, we were too reliant on Damulla for our vegetables. So then you have a question of people considering reorganizing their supply chains. Will they go for multiple suppliers, even if it's a little expensive, and so on? So now you people are in the technology sector, IT, technology. Some of you, I believe, are in management. So these are things you need to think about, because for IT and so on, it's good. If you're in the gloves industry, it looks good. If you're in tourism, more problematic, and so on, right? So that's sort of what the new normal is going to be. We are looking at the cessation of growth. Some countries going negative. The last time Sri Lanka went negative was 2001. We are looking at a little difficulty in the next little while, right? That's the new normal. So what kinds of work will there be in the new normal? That's our focus. This is, if you think about what I do, for example, I give advice to people, I write reports, sometimes I lecture, teach. That can be done pretty much entirely online. As is the best evidence being this activity that we are doing now. I mean, we have to rethink how we are doing it, but it's pretty much can be done, right? Then there are other cases, online and face-to-face. That is what I found when I was working on getting the business process outsourcing industry here. Because back in 2002, for example, I don't know whether you know, now you think, HSBC has people working here, WNS has got people working here. People are doing remote back office support, remote architects are working remotely. There's all kinds of things going on. 40,000, 50,000 people are employed in the BPO industry. But in 2002, there weren't. So when we were negotiating with these people to attract them to Sri Lanka, one of the things they were also looking at was the airport, proximity to the airport. And I said, I mean, this is done remotely. Why do you want to have proximity to the airport? They said, oh, that may be true that the work is done here, but we need to come and inspect, and we need to come at very short notice. Even in the garment industry, there's a lot of business travel. People come to inspect the factories, to have face-to-face negotiations on prices and quality, for troubleshooting and so on. So there's a number of jobs where both online and face-to-face components are there. And there are certain other jobs that are only face-to-face. That is, for example, if you are providing cleaning services, every large organization, the people who use them, they don't know or they don't think about the fact that somebody is cleaning that place. They're mopping the floors, cleaning the windows, and in a situation like now, they're disinfecting our rooms. Now, we don't think about them, but those are extraordinarily important people. Now, can they do their work from home like we do? No, they have to physically go to that place, right? If you're a doctor or a dentist, can you do your work remotely? Some doctors, yes, but if you're a dentist who's actually pulling people's teeth, that's still not possible to do remotely, right? One has to actually be in the co-presence of the patient. So you look at this categorization, and from that you can say in the new normal, the people who are working only face-to-face will be facing some risks. Maybe there will be attempts to reduce the number of jobs that are done face-to-face. But the people who are doing it entirely online will probably be marginally affected, if at all. Now, can we have the next set of questions, please? Questions, the two questions.
Yes, sir. Right away. Yes.
Ah, now I can see it.
Okay,
Right? So here we are asking, what kind of career are you planning? That is, are you going to be an entrepreneur or are you going to work for somebody? Are you going to work for somebody at the beginning, and then are you going to go on your own? And then it says, what kind of work environment do you prefer? So if you can quickly answer these, we'll see the tally. Can we put it up?
Yep, sir. Yep, sure. And no, we can do that. And
so what are we getting? What are the results?
yeah.
Okay, work for a large organization, then go on my own is the winner. And there are about 16% who want to go on their own. Okay. Combination of very few people want to work from home. Right. So it seems like you want to be, well, it doesn't say whether you want to work entirely online, but then when you say you don't want to work from home, that means that you would like some company, as would most people, as would I. Right, good. So now you have a sense of what everybody else in our virtual room is thinking. So let's move on. Okay. So now I'm going to focus on this online work environment, right? Because I think whether we like it or not, given our involvement in technology and the fact that you're studying at a technological campus, quite a lot of you will be working entirely online or in mixed formats, right? So the issue with this is that it has got mixed results, mixed outcomes. So if you really look at, now if I'm, for example, providing some kind of education services, and I provide it only for people who come to my classes, that means that my market, the people who can pay me for my services, is limited by geography. So if I'm doing this activity in, say, Kandy, it's unlikely that I will get people from Anuradhapura or Colombo or Matara coming to my classes, right? Because it just takes too much time. So there's a geographical boundary within which I work. Now, because of the new normal, let's say that I have now started offering it online, right? My favorite example is one of the most remote countries I've been to is a country called Timor-Leste. Now, most people in the room, if I could poll you, would not even know where Timor-Leste is. This is sort of, if you think of Australia, and then if you think of Indonesia, this is sort of in between Indonesia and Australia, a very small and very poor country. Now, when I went for some work there, I found that there was a woman there who was there because her husband was working. She was actually offering music instruction over the internet from this city called Dili, which is the capital of Timor-Leste. So you can provide music teaching of music. I think she was providing piano teaching or something like that over the internet, if you're willing to pay the data bills. And for her, it was worth it because she liked teaching, she liked music, and she was in this obscure place and her students were all in other countries, right? The issue is that when you do that, you get access to more students, that is for more demand, right? If you look at it in terms of supply and demand, there's a person who's supplying educational or music education services, and there are people who are paying to use that service, that is the demand. So greater demand for the same service means that your price could rise. However, when you open up markets, they don't open up only one way. That means that other people can start offering those same services in Kandy or Dili as well. So the people who had no alternative but to take my services, because I was the only music teacher in a particular location, would now have alternatives from other places. So there, with that additional factor put in, you could have a situation where prices could remain the same or they could even go down. So whatever monopolies that this provider of services had might be dissolved by this opening up, by this new technology. Because once you open up the technology, it doesn't say it opens up only in one direction, it opens up in both directions. So that is one reason why a lot of people, engineers associations, doctors associations, architects associations, etc., don't like trade agreements because they like their little monopolies. They want the buyers of their services to have no choices other than the limited choices that are available to them in this country. But some people, what we call the superstars, they will actually do very well in virtual markets. We call this the power law. So on your right-hand side, you see a diagram of something where there's a very high number and then it goes down very rapidly, what we call a long tail. So what that means is that some people will become very rich and very successful, but that's a small number. A lot of people will make small amounts of money, the long tail. Some people describe this as the 80-20 rule. That is 80% of the revenue is earned by 20% of the companies. 80% of the books in a library are not borrowed out, but 20% of the books are the ones that are most heavily used, right? So this idea of sort of it not being evenly distributed, but unevenly distributed is what we call the power law. Now, instead of talking about it abstractly, I'll give you an example from a 2016 study that was done by my organization, Learn Asia. We were looking at online freelancers. So these are people, I think, given the age group of my audience, I can assume that you know what online freelancing is. You know what Fiverr is. You know what doing logo design or coding remotely for people you have never seen for $5 or $20 or whatever. You know what that activity is. So back in 2016, now these numbers would have changed now. What we found was that the average earning that these people were doing, pretty much everybody was doing it part-time, was about 15,000 to 20,000 rupees a month. Not bad. If you're a student, if you've got another job and you do some little work on weekends and evenings, you're just getting some extra money. Some people were so successful, they were making over 1 lakh. Some people were telling me about the cars they had bought and how they had bought their parents a home, very high earnings. So you see that most of the people, if you look at the second chart, most of the dots are close to zero on the left-hand side. Very few people are making large amounts of money, right? That's the power law operating. And particularly, this doesn't apply to those working for companies, but for people who go into consulting or people who go into software from distance, you have to think that there's a chance that you will make enormous amounts of money, but there's also a chance that you might be relegated to the long tail because of the power law that may be operational. So that's something you need to think about. One way of course, looking after this is to work for a company. Now, working entirely online may not be true. Most effective is that you have some face-to-face interactions. So for example, in my organization, we've always had a work from home policy, nothing to do with COVID, particularly for the researchers. And all our colloquia, seminars, and so on were conducted in this manner, with some people physically present and some people in other countries. But the whole point is that we all know each other. There's a lot of interactions. We have an annual trip, and we have parties, and we celebrate each other's birthdays. So there's a lot of actual people getting to know each other, and then some interactions happen online. But if all interactions are happening online, you don't get the nonverbal communication. Now you can see me, but I can't see you right now, right? I don't know whether you're bored, whether you're yawning, whether you're petting your dog or whatever, right? So I don't see the nonverbals. In most meetings that I'm in, I think about where I'm seated, with whom do I have eye contact, and I observe the room because I want to read the nonverbals. Then there is a whole question of concentration of attention. Now really, I mean, you could have signed up for this talk because somebody is taking attendance or whatever, but you could have left the computer on in front of your desk and you may probably be doing something else, right? You could be playing a computer game, you could be reading a book, I don't know, whatever, right? You're on mute, you could be having a complete conversation with somebody else in the room. We have no idea, because what this mode does not do is that it does not allow us to capture your attention. If I was doing this in a large lecture theater and I had 50 people in front of me, I could see them. If they are using their phone, if they are talking to each other, all these things I can see from where I'm standing. So you have the compulsion to pay attention, right? Then there is this whole thing that we call water cooler conversations. That is, they're not formal meetings. They are people from different units in an organization who just happen to be there when they're getting some water or getting some coffee or whatever. And they just happen to talk about some of what they're doing. And some, what we call serendipitous. You know, Sri Lanka's name is, one of the names that was used is serendip, which is an unexpected and pleasant surprise. Something wonderful that you see without planning. So a serendipitous connection between two projects can be made in a water cooler conversation. And there's all kinds of tacit knowledge that could be communicated within an organization that will not be possible online means. But now I found in my organization that actually when we have a colloquium, we are using Zoom or Google Meet or something like that. I found that we also happen to be communicating, some people seem to be communicating to other people in the room using WhatsApp. So they're having this little side conversations using the same technology, even though they are not in the same place. And they're saying, oh, that's a terrible talk. What is he saying? How boring is this? Probably you are doing this even now, right? I hope not. Okay. Now, is that right? We are on slide 7. Okay. So if you're engaging in the new normal as an entrepreneur, that's 16% or whatever who thought you were going to go on your own, understand the power law. That means be best at what you do, because you want to be in that high earning, high demand segment of the market, not in the long tail, right? Also, you can't pass up opportunities for face-to-face interaction, because human beings still value trust and some intangible things they use to make decisions rather than what's on paper. That's why we have interviews for jobs. Others we can hire people entirely on CVs. We don't do that. We actually ask them to come and we look at their face and we ask them questions and so on, because that ancient human habit of looking at nonverbals. So look at those kinds of things. And even when interacting online, make sure that you're properly lighted and backdrop and so on and so forth, right? If you're organizing, now the large number of you are going to be working in companies. The really important thing when you're working in a company is if they are telling you to work from home. Now, as you know, Twitter, Facebook, all these companies are telling people you no longer have to come to office. You can work from wherever you are. But then you have to pay attention to how work is evaluated. Who gets rewarded? In Sri Lanka, most organizations that I've been in, I've worked mostly in government, except in my own organization that I set up. We tend to give standard increments. But in the United States and in the corporate sector, you don't get standard increments. You are evaluated and your salary increases are pegged on how you are evaluated. Now, you really have to pay attention to how you are evaluated, because that could be very different when you're no longer in front of people. And people can be cruel and people can be very harsh when they don't have to look you in the face. So you really have to be professional about it and have some casual conversations with people, talk about their families, talk about their hobbies, things like that. Talk about their projects rather than your projects, not be very instrumental. And then, of course, consider meetings to be extraordinarily important. I always tell the people who work for me, a 1-hour meeting requires about 3 hours of prep and then another 2-3 hours afterwards in order to note down what was said, to make sense of what went on in that meeting. So there's nothing called a 1-hour meeting. There's always, every 1-hour meeting involves multiples of 1 hour for the meeting to be productive. So that means you need to go to these things on time, you need to do prior preparation, and then you need to do the follow-up. Let's have the next set of questions, please. 3 questions this time.
Yes, sir. Yeah, lunch. Can you see it now, sir?
So this says, how do you want your performance to be measured? By time or by output, right? You understand the difference. Time spent at work, which is normally how we measure performance in Sri Lanka. Those who stay late are supposed to be more productive than those who leave at 5. Or are we measuring by output? Remember, the minute you start remote working, the time spent at work becomes a very problematic measure, right? Then do you work in groups during your studies? My students, when I was teaching in the US and in the Netherlands, used to hate working in groups mostly. But I used to compel them to work in groups because it's easier for me to grade their assignments. And because I said, hey, this is how the world is. You have to learn how to work in groups. What are your thoughts? When you're in the job, would you like to work in teams or would you like to work on your own? Let's see what the results are. I think there's enough time. Can we?
Okay, sir. You will go ahead. And share this. Share. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we have.
By output.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So you must remember, this is not easy, right? It's a good theoretically correct answer, but practically implementing it, if you're in an organization, is quite a challenge, right? It's less objective, less measurable, and so on. So you really need to work at it in order to get that performance indicator implemented. They have worked in groups. Oh my goodness, there's 19% who have worked alone. That's unusual. I didn't expect any number, any answers on that, on the no there. Would you like to work? Okay. So looks like SLTC has prepared you for your first job, 72%. Okay, thank you. Right, let's move on to the next one. Now we come to the last point that I want to communicate to you. And here, there is a concept called half-life, which comes from physics and chemistry, from the hard sciences. That is, how much time does it take for a radioactive material to lose half its volume or mass or whatever because it has now turned into something else. So something that is extremely radioactive will have a very short half-life, and something that is very stable will have a long half-life, right? So what we do is we take that concept from the hard sciences and we apply it to knowledge. And as you can see, I'm quoting a lot of engineers, but this is one of my favorite concepts. What this means is that the knowledge that you have at the end of your education, how much of it will be valid, how much of it will be worthwhile, worth it, how long will it take for half of it to disappear, right? So what they say here is that in an article written in 1962 or 1966, they said an engineering graduate in the late 1920s could use half what he or she learned even 35 years later. It was not obsolete. But from 1960 onwards, only half would be gone, half would be wasted, would be obsolete after 10 years, right? And then on the right-hand side, you have the calculations made for 2002. Now, these are not precise, right? These are estimates. But this means the basic argument being that half-life is decreasing, right? That means that what we learn is becoming obsolete faster and faster. This is not something very radical that I'm saying. Most people know what this is, right? So let's look at the last set of questions, the quiz questions now. Here I'm asking, but before we get to that, let me just introduce it. If half your knowledge is going to be obsolete in 5 years or 10 years, what do you have to do? You have to keep replenishing it. You have to keep learning. So that means that we are looking at a situation, even without COVID-19, where people had to take additional courses, keep replenishing their knowledge, right? So here we are asking, have you ever, up to this point, have you taken an online course? Then we are asking, after you graduate, do you think you have to keep learning? And how much time do you think a week you have to spend on it? And then the third question, which I can't fully see, but hopefully we will be able to show it to you. We will ask you about whether you want to undertake further studies, etc. So can we answer at least one or two right now so that we can scroll up or down?
You can see it now, sir, fully.
I think, no, I just have to scroll it. It's okay. If they can see it, that's fine. The third question, I can only see partially. Yeah, when I scroll down, I can see it. Yeah. Results? They have taken online courses. Wonderful, wonderful. 80% have taken online courses. Okay. You spend 10 hours, you think, 5 hours. 1%. 1% says, I'm not planning to do anything. Okay. Just work and enjoy life. Very reasonable answer, but you may not have that luxury. Okay. Right. So, let's see. Now, again, I'll bring you to a concrete example of how this works. So I run a research organization called Learn Asia. I set it up in 2004. Actually, I can't say I run it. I have a different person running it as CEO. I'm the chairman of the board. We have about 20 people working here in Sri Lanka and others working outside. We have a small group that is data analytics. We call that data algorithms and policy unit. And 1 year, we asked people to keep track of how much time they were spending on learning. This is very difficult because sometimes you're working, but you're also learning at the same time. Sometimes you're actually taking a course, which is very clear, but in other cases, it's sort of mixed up. So we had great challenges in designing the proper forms to get this information reported. But anyway, the end result was, I'm sure this has some plus or minus factors, that the data team was spending almost 40% of their time on learning. in some cases, they were taking Coursera courses, and we were actually paying for that, right? You can take free Coursera courses, or you can actually take the certificate. So in some cases, we actually thought it was for the benefit of the organization to help them to get these certificates. Now, we have a lot of other people who are from economics, management kind of backgrounds. And in their case, they were spending about 10% of their time on learning. The rest of the time, they were working. So you can see that when it comes to big data analytics, when it comes to people working on AI or machine learning or things like that, the information, the knowledge that they need is changing so rapidly that most likely they didn't get it from the university that they came from. They had to pick it up while at work. So this is an example of a very knowledge intensive organization. I don't think this will be the same if you go to a sort of a more service oriented organization, but it's something to keep in mind. So I think this is my last slide. The question is learning versus credentials. So that example that I gave earlier, which is people who are taking Coursera for the sake of taking Coursera, and people who are taking a certificate. Why do we need certificates? Because we call it a credential. It is to show other people that we have the knowledge, right? So we can have a lot of learning going on without certificates. But we have to think about the fact that particularly when you're changing jobs, you need certificates. So I'll just finish with this story. In January 2004, I was reading some blogs in Sinhala, and I found some young man had written something about big data or data analytics in Sinhala. And I said, oh, this seems an interesting guy. Let's hunt him up. Let's find him. Because we were hiring at that time. So we went, through the blogs and various things, and we found him. To find he had not even got a degree. He was still doing his BIT degree, Bachelor in Technology, the sort of distance learning option. But long story short, we employed him. And he was very good. He learned through us, and then he went back to a different company with now, of course, now he finished his BIT, but he had a lot of learning that he got from our organization, and he got a promotion, and he is now working in Estonia. Obviously a very well-paid, prestigious job, right? We don't pay too much attention to certificates. We actually do, our interviews are more like exams. We actually get people to do things to see whether they know what they're talking about, right? So what universities do is that we combine the knowledge that we think is needed, and we say this particular package is what is required, and that's we call a degree. But there is another method that we have had to some extent in North American universities. I can remember in my university, we had something called special arrangements, where you put together a program and get it approved. And then that's a unique program unique to yourself. But now we have a concept called badging, where you can just like in scouting, you can take a qualification in one area, you can take a qualification in another area, you can become a scrum master in a particular area, you can get a certain level in Apache, etc. Put the set together and say that's the equivalent of a master's. So that's a new way of the world, way the world is moving. These are things you need to think about, because not for people like me who can say, I don't care about degrees, I've got all the degrees I want. But for people like you who've got to make a career, you need to think about how you proceed from the next job. I think that's the end of the talk. I think we have gone a little over the time limit that we were thinking about, but what can we do now?
Yes, I think our dear students and of course my fellow faculty members can post their questions, and we will moderate it and we will take it each question, and we will have a discussion based on all those questions. I think so. We have a first question now.
Okay.
What is the current job market in engineering field with labor cutoff? What kind of job are out there where a fresh graduate can do?
Now, see, that's a very broad question for which you can't get an answer. Because remember what I said? It all depends on the industry, right? If, for example, you're in an industry where growth is up, where growth is likely to go up, well, let me give you an example. Mr. Mukesh Ambani is one of the world's richest men. He is the owner of Reliance Group in India, right? So Reliance Group originally was in oil and gas. And now increasingly with a company called Reliance Jio, it is getting into the IT sector, into information services, transaction platforms, and so on. What we find with Reliance Jio is that all the profits, all the demand, all the investment is moving to the new tech side. The old oil and gas side is actually suffering. It's the companies on that side of the divide, the old companies, are not being seen as very likely to grow. So when you say engineering, that's a very broad term, right? So you have to think about it in a different way. Rather than think engineering, you have to say, what is the area that I'm in, right? Next question, please.
Sir, I can't post the question because my keyboard is not working. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Good morning, sir. I am Randimal Jesundar from engineering school. I have a doubt about the private section job and the government section jobs, and
Sure.
the comparing together with the previous situation and the new situation. My second question is what is the resign process? I mean, how to leave the organization, the resignment. How can we do that? And that's all. Thank you, sir.
Okay, right now, in the context of this particular event, the curfew and so on, I wrote about it, saying that, say, people who are working, again, the answers were different. Government people who are working for government did not have any doubt. They had no question about whether they will get a salary at the end of the month. And the government salaries came. But if you're working for the government industry, if you're working in the zone, what happened in the private sector, they said, oh, for the month of March and April, we will pay salaries. I was talking to some of the CEOs, and they said, we are paying salaries, but we are not paying the allowances and the bonuses and the additional amounts. So in many cases, that's actually a huge pay cut, right? And they said, we don't know what we're going to do after May, because if we have no orders, we won't be able to pay. So you can see that in the private sector, life was becoming very uncertain, right? Because if these people don't have money, they'll, there's a certain amount they can pay from their reserves, but beyond that point, they may not be able to actually pay. They may not have money in their bank accounts. So definitely you can say that government work is safer, more reliable than private sector work. But the issue there is, how long will the government be able to keep this up? You saw that the Secretary of the President said, I am giving my salary back to the government. Why don't you also donate part of your salary? He told that to the government officials because we are short of money. If companies are not doing well, if exports are down, as I showed you in my second slide, the government is going to have a financial crisis. very soon. And they may not be able to pay salaries. So government work in the long run may also be a problem. In other countries, particularly in the United States, where I lived for a long time, there are times when the government has to balance the budget, particularly at the state level, and they will say, we are very sorry. They use a term called furlough. And they say, even though you work for the government, even though you thought you were going to work till retirement, we are asking you to go home. And we are not able to pay you for the next 6 months. After 6 months, contact us. We'll see whether we can bring you back. So government issue is also not going to be very simple unless the economy picks up. Now, I'm not going to get into, I don't usually talk about the future. I'm not a fortune teller. I don't talk about the future in a very confident way. But roughly, the difference between economists who are looking at the Sri Lankan economy now is people who see a U-shaped recovery. A U-shaped recovery means that we will have a decline in growth, maybe down to the negative side. And then you see a U, so we go down, and then we'll be at that lower level for some time. And then we will rise, then we will get up, right? So that's a U. Now, a V-shaped recovery is, of course, much better. You can see we go down, and then immediately we start rising. In a U, you stay at the lower level for some time. Now, the debate that I have been participating in with a number of economists and so on is, what shape of a U do we have? Nobody in Sri Lanka is talking about a V, because our tourist industry cannot come back to where it was immediately. There is no way that it can happen, right? So because of that, we think it's a U with a long horizontal part or a short horizontal part. That's the issue that we are debating. How does one leave a job? Well, I've left plenty of jobs in my life. What I tell young people who seek advice from me is generally don't leave, within the first few weeks, months. Generally speaking, consider what you're doing and spend a year or two in a job. That way it doesn't cause problems in future interviews. Because if you see that somebody is just spending very short periods in each job, most conventional interviewers will take that as a negative sign. But otherwise, generally speaking, always leave in a respectful manner. Communicate your desire to leave, the reasons you want to leave, honestly and clearly, and reduce the disruption to the organization. I always do a handover. I write down where all my files are, where all my passwords are, and so on, and I give it to the next person who's coming. The last time I left a job was as ICTA chairman, and I handed over very orderly manner to the people who are coming in. Okay. Next, please.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Professor, there is I'm a little bit concerned about the new trend, what is happening over the world because of the new situation and the new normal. Rather than completing a degree, some organization offering credits, and there are employers looking at a credit completion of the given area and they're hiring. Therefore, it has been developed new paradigm in education. You select an organization or education institute, you go and get the credit worth what you need, and then go to another university and you earn the credit on that particular subject you think which is going to be increase your probability of opportunity of employment. Do you think it will continue, or there will be opportunity for Sri Lanka or Sri Lankan Institute to do that?
Well, it all depends on the kinds of organizations that you work in. Now, I've been on too many interview panels in government, And unfortunately in government, quite a lot of the activity of the interview panel is making sure that there's a certificate and the length of the degree and whether the university is a recognized university and various formalities like that, right? So the job descriptions in government also tend to be very precisely written. Master's degree from a recognized university and so on and so forth, right? While you go to the other extreme, you go to, say, Google's hiring practices, recruitment practices, one of the most successful and one of the most attractive companies in the world to work for, Google or Alphabet. They no longer look at degree certificates. They no longer look at GPA or any of that. They basically have their own battery of tests that they run people through. So they have gone to the extent of saying, we really don't care what kind of degree you have, right? So if you have a really bright person who's coming in and the important point is how do they get the interview at a company like Google? But if you manage to get through to that first screen, then you get tested. So each company will see what kind of knowledge does this person have. Now in my organization, we actually set problems. I've actually been doing interviews the last bit on Zoom actually. And we have a slide set that we send the person at the start of the interview. And then we say, now please go to slide 4 and there's a problem there. And now you can share the screen and you can work out how you're answering this problem. And there'll be these 2 guys, my tech guys, who will be looking at it and say, taking them through the steps, right? So if companies are willing to do that, that's very time consuming, right? And it's risky. That's why they go for certificates. Government is not about taking risks, it's about minimizing risks. So the government says, oh, we'll just look for certificates, and you get people who have certificates but no knowledge. In the other system, you're saying we don't care about the certificates. So the certificates is sort of a necessary condition, but what we are really looking for is whether you have the knowledge. So it's a mix. There's no clear answer, but if you really look at the last 2 slides that I used, it's about people putting together their own packages. Does it come from online courses? Does it come from work experience? Does it come from credit given by companies? Those are all going to be accelerated, those processes, in the next little while. Okay.
Good. Our next question is, does a person with a lot of knowledge in only one field has more advantage rather than a person who has a balanced knowledge on new field? Yeah.
I like this question.
Yeah, I think that's what it's in nutshell is this the student asking it's a combination of engineering versus with diploma certificate or management with accounting and software.
I know this question very well. My wife is of the opinion that it's better to have very deep and intense knowledge in one area, and she's an expert on, on this subject as well. But if I look at myself, I find that I actually am very multidisciplinary. I work between disciplines, law, economics, and technology. So I find that today, what we really need are people. For most of the things that I have seen, we need people who can pull from multiple areas. So all of us agree that this thing called learning to learn is very important. The ability to have conversations with people in other fields is very important. So that means some knowledge about that field. So you should have some place where you're fully anchored, you know that area very well, but you are working in teams, and in the teams are people who are very different to you. So you need to be able to have those conversations. In order to have those conversations, each discipline has got terminology, language of its own, concepts. So you need to be able to use those concepts to have those conversations. Otherwise, you'll never be able to make the team work properly. So my sense is that actually the world is going away from specialized disciplines, and the real requirement is for multiple approaches, multiple methodologies, multiple frameworks to be brought to bear on problems. And it may be that as single human beings, we are not capable of pulling all of it together. We have to work in teams. So actually something that I wrote recently in a proposal was that not only do we have to work in teams, but teams have to work with other teams. So I'll use that example. We are looking at some data applications that can help data, I mean, heavy duty machine learning kinds of things that can be used for medical purposes, to help deal with this COVID epidemic. So in there, what I was saying, I've got interdisciplinary teams inside my own organization, but we will be working with teams of doctors. So teams working with other teams is how we are going to solve this problem, rather than some individual sitting in a room and thinking great thoughts. So yes, multidisciplinarity is important, but you got to be anchored in something. You need to know something quite well.
I think stemming from that answers, let me revisit what we discussed a little while ago.
Sure.
This is very much concerned about Sri Lankan education system. I think as a policymaker and a teacher, I think you have enough experience to answer this question. Again, going back to this conventional wisdom of I should have a degree, or I have to complete it, I should have become a specialist. Or let me think this way, somebody is doing management and because of the new situation, new normal, you need to have a machine learning, data analytics and things like that. You to survive in this job market. And therefore, why not make that our student experience and their life become more easier? Don't you think our education system should look at it rather than completion of a conventional degree course, or give them a credit? Rather, okay, I do OB credit X amount, and then I will do Y amount of machine learning. And then other side is the employer. How we can match this disparity? It's a disruption actually.
Yeah. Valid points, but not easy to implement. One could argue that I think, your credits idea and so on are very good. Increasingly, good programs, particularly in cutting edge areas like machine learning and so on, tend to mix formal education, classroom kind of education, with internships and work experience. So that even if you technically are spending 4 years in a degree program, quite a number of those years are working with in companies. So for example, we have students from University of Chicago who are now working with us. That's the new normal. In the old days, they would think they had to get on a plane and come to Sri Lanka, and I'll have to get them a visa. Now they're sitting in Chicago. This is one of the world's leading universities. And they're working with us on projects, right? That's part of their degree program. But they are doing it with us here on our data analytics programs. So yeah, we have to make those changes. But I have a feeling that it's up to the companies and to the students to make those changes. The education system is a big lumbering beast. I don't think it changes very quickly.
Okay, so thank you. And we are revisiting your presentation, sir.
Okay.
And he's very much concerned about one area you have mentioned. So can you explain what is the program to start working as a freelancer?
Oh, huh. Okay. Let me tell you a story about that. Sometime in 2013 or so, long ago, I was doing some work in Bangladesh. And somebody talked to me about online freelancing. So I hadn't heard about this, right? Now, I mean, I'm in this business. This is what I do for a living. So I made some inquiries and I found that there were all these Bangladeshis who were getting on various platforms called, Fiverr is one. There are various platforms where basically people offer to work. They put up there's a way of advertising yourself. And then on the other side, there are people who offer work. That is, I want a logo designed or I want to get something translated. They put the work up on the other side. And then, the platform allows the two sides to kind of come to an agreement. And then you're said, this work is due by such and such day and so on and so forth. And you do the work and you submit it. And the person says, okay, I'm satisfied with the quality. And here's the money. Now, of course, there are problems about getting the money to Sri Lanka and so on, but that's how it's done. So I heard about it in Bangladesh. So I came back and I started talking to people here. And I found that if I was talking to people below 40 years old, they seemed to know what I was talking about. People above 40 and people in government, they didn't know what on earth I was talking about. So then we actually got some money and we did the research on online freelancing. So if anybody goes to the learnasia.net website and searches learn, LIRNEASIA, one word, puts sort of online freelancing or something like that in a search term, you'll find all these reports popping up. We found that the largest number of people were in the Vayamba province, around Kurunegala, Kuliapitiya, that area. So it was almost like there were more people who were doing it, who were knowledgeable about it, etc., away from Colombo than in Colombo. Right? So this was something that the government hadn't promoted, but people were doing it anyway. They had just learned from friends and contacts. Basically, you sit in your house, you sit in an evening, and you do logo design, or you do software, or you do translations, or various things, and you get paid for it. That's what online freelancing is. Now, there's a sort of a very ugly part of it, which is, there's things like ad clicking and so on, where people have been defrauded. So I never recommend that anybody does any of that. Very boring, sort of stupid work. But now increasingly, there's some kind of mechanical work where you label images. Just to use an old example, you get enormous numbers of pictures being flashed at you. And you label that as a cat and this as a dog, that as a cat and this as a dog. These label pictures are used to train artificial intelligence software. So even though the whole promise of artificial intelligence is that it does things automatically, it does things without humans, for the training data set, quite a lot of sort of really boring, repetitive human work is done. So that kind of work is also being done, and there's actually a company that has been set up, which is getting that kind of work done through people, but there's no single location. They work from wherever they are. That's online freelancing.
Okay, sir, thank you very much. And I need to post this question, otherwise I will get kicked out from IT room. From my IT team, sir. How does one make one's IT skill set into a cash cow in the condition of especially new normal?
Okay, again, you have to look at it, you have to break it down, right? I mean, IT is a big field. So obviously the creative types, the software people and so on, the architects and so on, they will be in demand. Though I have to also tell you that there have been layoffs in the IT sector in the last 2 months, right? Because I'll use an example. I don't want to harm any companies, but let's see. So let's take, everybody knows that the airline industry is in difficulty right now. There are no flights, nobody's buying tickets. Flights have been canceled. So that means there's no revenue, right? But the lease payments on the aircraft and so on, they have to be still paid. Those are very big amounts. So every airline in the world is now running at a loss, right? Now, imagine that you were employed by a software company that was providing services to the airline industry. I don't know of any such company. That's why I'm making up this example. There are companies that are affected by this in Sri Lanka, but I don't want to use their examples. So that the airlines, which are the buyers for the software services or the IT services, will now be extremely conservative, frugal about spending money. So they will say, now we are going to cut everything that is not essential because we are losing money every day. So what gets cut is all the software contracts. Pretty much everything gets cut. When that happens, there was this company that was doing extremely well in Sri Lanka, employing several hundred software engineers who were supporting the airline industry, whose only business was the airline industry. Now they've got to start laying off engineers. But on the other hand, you take, let's take this particular example. I would think that at the Sri Lanka Technology Campus, the people who are sort of tech support are now more important than they used to be. Because without them, there won't be classes, there won't be lectures. All these things require skills. So they will be in greater demand. So it again depends. See, you've got to go back and see what this activity is and how is the activity affected. Just because you're in software, it doesn't mean that you will uniformly benefit. Just because you're in hardware maintenance, it doesn't mean that you will be uniformly benefited. But as a general principle, I would say that the information and communication technology sector will do well in a post-COVID economy, because we will, for some time, place greater weight on remote interactions and transactions. And for that, the IT sector people will be the ones who will be needed.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Just a question, a little bit away from what we discussed, but I think still it's a concern from student. Will it be an advantage having extra qualification such as sports qualification from universities when we enter the professional world in future, in addition to the education qualification?
You see, one of the most important things, what do you actually learn from school, not university, but school, is how to come on time and follow orders and, function in a large organized setting. Actually, current school models are designed to prepare people to work in factories and large offices, not for them to become innovators or entrepreneurs. But there are some parts of school, like for example, sports, where you have to cooperate, right? So for the longest time, the Sri Lankan private sector used to give a lot of weight. You couldn't get into the plantation companies, the people who ran the tea estates in the old days before nationalization, unless you had done sports. You had to have played rugby, you had to have played cricket, etc., because that teamwork, of the ability to work in groups cooperatively, to lead groups, these are all very difficult skills. Not everybody can be a leader. So you think that if a person was the captain of a rugby team, they know how to lead people, they know how to get people working for a common purpose. So that is sort of really why sports is given a lot of importance in certain industries. So if you look at it that way, I believe that teamwork is going to be important throughout, right? It's going to be more and more important. So for that reason, anything that requires sort of coordination and teamwork will have some weight. And then, of course, we want people who can take leadership. I mean, I generally never ask people what school they've been to. I think it's very primitive to judge people by the school they went to or the name of their parents or anything like that. I think they should be judged on their own. But when I look at my organization, even now, I mean, these people have worked for me for more than 10 years. I can say, oh, she was the head girl at such and such school. She was the head prefect in such and such place. So, that means that I had paid attention, that I can remember that I have that many head prefects. Why? Because that's a sign of leadership. They know their subject, but in addition, they can take leadership and they can get teams to work. They can get people to work and work for a common purpose. So those kinds of intangible skills will always be important. But of course, what is interesting is, I think more and more we haven't really caught up with it. I've now got guys who are doing something called Esports. I'm sure this audience knows what Esports is. This is very intensive work, games that are played on computers, very high-powered computers, right? The same computers that we use for data analytics work we are supposed to be optimized for gaming. So those kinds of things where you have people located in different places, but coordinating and cooperating and working on common plans might become more important as we move forward, rather than the old rugby and cricket kind of games.
Okay, so thank you. I think
almost 90 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. There are a few questions on the way. I think we need to relook at sports, because if you see in US, you have NBA people. I mean, when you're good at it, you get a scholarship. And somebody like Kumar Sangakkar, we miss as a really good lawyer, because he had the opportunity of law or cricket. And therefore, I think we missed a good lawyer also because of that situation we had. Okay, stemming from that, so we will go to the next question. Can you explain what are the demand fields we can work through agriculture technology?
Agriculture. Yeah, Sri Lankan agriculture is extraordinarily inefficient. That means that we have about 25% of the population working in agriculture, including tea, rice, everything, and which contributes about 7% to the GDP. Farmers are not well paid. People who work in tea plantations are not paid a living wage. So obviously they are not happy. Neither are consumers happy. The consumers think that they are getting low quality food with lots of chemical residue, and they are getting it at a high price. And that is true. One of the reasons why Sri Lanka is not competitive with a lot of other Asian countries is because our food is too expensive. I can buy cheaper food in Singapore than in Sri Lanka, right? Even though we are a poorer country, food in Singapore is cheaper than here because our agriculture is very inefficient and we have got lots of government duties and prohibitions and things to protect inefficient farmers. We charge heavy duties. I think you know about the salmon tin. During the beginning of the curfew, salmon was going to be given to us for 100 rupees a tin. And now the tax on a salmon tin or a canned fish tin, the tax only is 100 rupees, right? So that means that every time you buy a tin of canned fish, just imagine in your head that you're taking a 100 rupee note and say, give this to the government and say the 100 rupees to the government. So that is the situation that we have in our agriculture sector. Obviously, this can be made more efficient. We have a number of startups like SenseAgro, which is using technology, sensors to do precision agriculture. So that's a very hardware and software-based solutions so that you don't give too much water or too much fertilizer, because what we do in our countries, we have subsidized fertilizer and then we use too much water. We use water as a weed killer. I'm sorry, you should never ask me questions about agriculture. I have been studying agriculture now for the last 10 years. So I know a little bit too much about agriculture now. So we put too much fertilizer, subsidized. Then we put too much water, not priced. And the water dissolves the fertilizer and sends it away. It's a kind of crazy system we have. So precision agriculture says apply the right amount of fertilizer and the right amount of water, appropriate for the soil conditions, rather than drown the thing in chemicals and fertilizer. So we have a situation where we have been, a lot of people don't know, but we export, our export of vegetables, fruits and vegetables in 2018 or 2019 was more than what we got from exporting raw rubber. That is, rubber in unprocessed form was so little. And vegetables is the highest growing sector. We are exporting karavila and patola and various things as far away as to Europe. But all these cases, you have to use enormous amounts of technology to make it efficient, because they have standards for the vegetables that they expect, that they receive. If the vegetables have too much chemical residues, it will be rejected. Not only will that vegetable be rejected, the entire container will be rejected. And if you get 2 containers that are rejected, 3 containers rejected, you will be banned from entering the European market. So all these requires the use of information technology to improve our agriculture, make it more efficient, make it more export friendly. So there's a whole lot of work that has been done. What I'm hoping is that this particular situation, the curfew, made everybody think about food, because food was a problem in the month of March and early April for most people. And they made me think about food, the quality of food, where food comes from, and so on, the price. So I'm hoping that we will use this opportunity to apply more technology and more knowledge to the agriculture field and make agriculture a dynamic sector in our industry, where we'll have hopefully less, well, maybe about 5% of our population working in agriculture and producing 20% of the GDP, which is a good sign. In America, which is one of the world's greatest exporters of agricultural produce, only 2% of the population is engaged in agriculture. Just as an aside for everybody here in the room, I hope you know that Most people in Sri Lanka like Mysore Parippu, the orange Parippu. I don't know whether anybody knows where it comes from. It comes from Canada, a very far away place. Comes from a province called Saskatchewan, right? So can you imagine that those people using this enormous farms and a lot of machinery, satellite data, technology to test the soil and the water and everything, are producing dal, producing parippu at such a low price that they can compete with people with exporters in India and so on, by using technology. So that's the situation we have to reach for.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And one last question, summing up the session. We talk about a lot of professional qualifications and how we get in and how we collect it and use it. But let me summing up this with the cognitive skills part of it, summing up a lot of questions together. What would be the cognitive mindset or mental state should student should be inculcate in order to face in future challenges?
Well, inculcate suggests that the university is going to do that. I don't know. Well, you see, there are two things. Universities are in the business of giving credentials. That is, you think of it as a three-cornered relationship. There's a potential employer. There is the potential employee, that is the student who has got a degree, got a qualification. And then in the middle is the university. So the potential employer is basically asking the university, can you certify that this person has the required knowledge? And the university says, yes, I can. This person has got a degree, here's a certificate. That's what the certificate communicates. And here's what this person has done, and here's the grade point average, and here's the class, and various other kinds of information that are given as part of degree certificates. That is the traditional old method. But as I said in my presentation, as I concluded, I said, if the half-life of knowledge is going down, that is, what does that mean? That most of what you learn in the university is obsolete by the time you get to work. And the longer you have 5-10 years at work, pretty much nothing that you learned in university is of any value anymore. That is generally what I can say. I mean, the theories, the concepts, sort of. So what remains after 10 years is what you could say is our ability to write, our ability to communicate, our ability to systematically look for information, ability to distinguish good knowledge from bad knowledge. In short, our ability to learn. So there are many people, if you read the relevant literature, you'll see people are talking about something called transversal competencies, and they will talk about something called learning to learn. That the greatest skill that you can give people is process skills, learning to learn. So for example, a part of what I learned in my PhD, I can barely remember the substance of what I learned in my PhD, was that we were expected to read about 3 or 4 books. I'm not talking articles, books every week, right? So that means that you had to learn how to read in a different way, not read a book from beginning to end, but read a book in all kinds of different ways, going through the index, going through the table of contents. And now, of course, it's even better. I can get the computer to also help me to read quickly. So to absorb large amounts of information, to distinguish between good information and bad information, and to think creatively about how new knowledge can be generated. That's what a PhD is always about creating new knowledge, how to design research projects, what method is appropriate to answer what questions. So learning to learn, those kind of process questions are, I think, the most important thing. And to the extent that universities can reorient themselves to give that kind of knowledge, they will be providing a service of value. But I think the real responsibility is always with the students themselves to do the learning and to take the knowledge, which is something I have always believed. Uh, it's the responsibility of the learner to learn, to get the knowledge rather than have it poured down their throat. So that sounds like a good way to end, yeah?
Yes, and very appropriately. I mean, this is a wonderful experience to all of us, and your knowledge, what you have shared with us, it's countless. And I think, I hope our student inspired by whatever Professor Rohan Samarajiva discussed with us. And it's really indeed an honor to moderate this session. And again, thank you very much, sir. And we hope you will be able to share more thoughts in the future, because we have a series of that even for our faculty members very soon. And with your time permits, we will invite you again, sir. Again, from Sri Lanka Technological University and my team, Center for Communication Skills Development, and of course from IT team from here, I would like to thank you very much and hope you will be able to share your knowledge again with us soon, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, sir. And of course, I would like to thank all the student and faculty members, with especially for faculty members with their busy schedules. And of course, I'm really wonderful to see most 100% student participation. And that's wonderful to see that. And thank you very much for your very intelligent questions. And you may see a lot of industry experts will come, starting from Mr. Rohan Pallevatta and Mr. Dilip Mudadeniya. Those industry experts will be continue to do these sessions. Hopefully you will continue with us. And especially I want to thank Nipuni and my Center for Communication Center, Development Center colleagues, and especially Charit and Manu and all the, and of course Sashi and all the members who make this opportunity successful without any technical hiccups. And once again, thank you all. I'm Leslie Uduwavidane signing off now. Thank you.